It is Thursday, November 9th, 2023, and you're listening to the MMA Eco Live podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Chris Presnell, coming to you live from beautiful Portland, Oregon. And this, folks, is episode 33 of the podcast. 33 episodes deep. I believe we started some point last spring and have made every single week except for maybe like two. So that's pretty good consistency going on. Some of you, I feel like, have been live on the podcast almost every single episode. So that is crazy. I wish I had a way to kind of see the stats on who may or may not have done that, or who has like the best attendance. But happy for you to be joining. Whether it's your first time, whether you're one of the regulars, either way, the way this works is, you know the drill. Going to go through the Asian MMA schedule for the weekend, highlight prospects, fights that I think you should know about. Going to be covering prospects, fights, events from Kazakhstan, China, Japan, South Korea, Southeast Asia, and then fighters from those countries all throughout the world. India as well, left that out. But yeah, so this weekend, not a whole lot going on in the Asian MMA schedule, but I'll get to what is going on. And then after that, you can throw me your questions. You can also throw those in the chat now, and I will get to those later. We do have two moderators standing by, so keep that in mind. But otherwise, let's get into the schedule. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already. But yeah, basically this weekend, you already know what's kind of dominating the coverage. That's UFC 295 going down in New York. Always look forward to those cards. They're always exciting cards that both deliver on star power and on entertainment. So this weekend is no different, even with the main event falling out a few weeks ago. So really still excitement level is high. Some people would even say maybe even a little bit higher, losing the main event and getting an interim title as a replacement. But tomorrow, Friday, got two events going on that I'm going to put on your radar. One is One Friday Fights 39. These go on every single week. Sometimes I cover them, or sometimes I'll highlight them, sometimes not. This week, there is two Filipino prospects fighting this weekend. One of them is at this event, One Friday Fights 39. That is Eli Fernandez. He is 6-2. And then the other guy is also 6-2. That is Jomar Paak. And of all places that he could fight, he is fighting at Fury Challenger Series 10 this Sunday. Fury Fighting is a Texas-based promotion, so not really sure. I'm not really familiar with Jamar, what the story is there, if he trains stateside or what. I'm guessing he's probably at some kind of residency. If not, I'm not familiar with him or his story, but that did kind of stand out to me when I was looking over the different events coming up. Well, there's a Filipino guy fighting at Fury Challenger Series. Very unusual, but very cool. I'll be checking that out. But yeah, otherwise, One Friday Fights going down tomorrow from Bangkok. The two MMA fights, there is Ivan Parshikov, who is still undefeated in one championship, fighting against the returning Ben Royal from Australia, and then Cooper Smith fighting Eli Fernandez. And then the other event, I've realized that I really, in some ways, need to be paying more attention to Russian MMA and the events going down there, because a lot of times they will feature prominent fighters from throughout Central Asia, including Kazakhstan. And tomorrow at AMC Fight Nights 122, two of my biggest Kazakh prospects that I have, and I do keep my own rankings list from these countries, and two guys that are in my top 5. These are fighters outside the UFC, mind you. Two guys in my top 5, both fighting for titles at AMC Fight Nights. That's Darmen Ermekov fighting for the middleweight title against Dmitry Arishev, a Russian guy. And then the bantamweight title is Sabit Zhusupov against Megaram Ghassanzadeh, a guy from Azerbaijan. So big title fights for both of these guys. Both are really good prospects out of Kazakhstan. Still kind of learning about who these guys are and their abilities, but they are pretty high up on my list. So AMC Fight Nights, I believe, airs on YouTube. So those will be two prospects to check out. Then let's go to Saturday. Not a whole lot going on Saturday. We do have Deep 116 Impact going down from Tokyo, Japan, and not a whole lot to highlight on this card. I've got Road UFC veteran Jinosuke Kashimura on the card. In the main event, you've got the longtime Ryzen veteran Yuki Motoya has left Ryzen and now he's fighting in Deep. He's going to be fighting Kosuke Terashima, which I feel like this should be a fairly easy win for him. But yeah, Yuki Motoya lost to Kai Asakura by KO from a knee in his last fight. Before that, he was on a pretty good win streak. So curious to see what kind of his direction is here, fighting in Deep rather than Ryzen. So yeah, look for that. And then also on Saturday, going down from Indonesia in Jakarta is One Pride Fight Night 74. So this is their monthly live show. Every other week is replays of the prelims. But for this event, they've got the lightweight title, Anga Hans versus Ronald C. Han. That's right. So Anga, also, as you know, Road to UFC alum, and then after that, he came back to One Pride, lost fight, and then has won a couple straight. He's regained the title again, and he's fighting Ronald C. Han, not to be confused with Ronald C. Han, who is also a Road to UFC alum, and he has another fight scheduled with Cage Warriors currently. But this is a different guy. This guy has not fought for Road to UFC before. Sihan is on a little bit of a win streak, and so he's earned a title shot. The other two fights on the card, Sukma Aditya versus Farrell Stefan, and Faisal Lasse, who trains out of Bali MMA, fighting Uku, spelled UCU, Uku Rohindi. I'm not really super familiar with most of these guys. I know Faisal a little bit. But these are kind of contender-ish fights. But curious to see what the other fights on the event are. Usually they'll spit out all of the fights that we can expect to see over the next couple weeks. So One Pride 74 goes down this Saturday from Jakarta, Indonesia. Main event is Anga Hans versus Ronald C. Han. One Pride Fight Night airs on YouTube, and if you just pay them $1 a month, then you get every single show every single Saturday. It's a steal, probably the best in all of MMA. Aside from free. Free's nice too. But yeah, so before I hop to UFC 295, I covered Fury Challenger Series 10 with Jamar. And then Sunday, there's a Pancrase doubleheader. Not really sure what the thinking is here of splitting this into two different numbered events that occur right after one of the other sequentially. Pancrase 338 and 339. One of the oldest MMA promotions in the world, if not the oldest. But on this event, you've got one interesting competitor on here is Kim Sang-won, who fought to the semifinal round of Road UFC this year. Not often that they pull in a Korean fighter to Pancrase, but they brought him in there, and he's going to be fighting Yohei Nada, another Japanese guy, has a 13-9-2 record. Kim, to his credit, has a lot of knockouts, and Nada has never been knocked out. So could be in for an interesting and exciting fight there. Elsewhere on the kind of collab of these two events, another Road to UFC alum, Kazuma Maruyama, who lost this year in Road to UFC. He is fighting against Shinichi Taira. Other than that, not a whole lot to highlight. Pancrase has a big show coming up, I believe, end of year, Pancrase 340. A lot of big Japanese MMA events, both with like Deep Shudo and with Pancrase coming up in December. But you got a couple. You got, I think, four Road to UFC alums competing this weekend, and Anga, Kazuma Maruyama, and Jinosuke Kashimura, and Kim Sang-won. So a couple things to watch for there. Otherwise, it's a pretty quiet weekend in Asian MMA. And let's shift over to UFC 295. So this event, and just for the fun of it, I'll throw the event up on the screen. Obviously, you know the drill. I'm not going to cover like every single fight on the card. That's not really what we do on this podcast unless you ask about them. But this card, which I'm very excited for, I will be covering the live Tapology coverage for UFC 295. I mean, you got the goods from top to bottom. If it's not a star power loaded fight, it's going to be really exciting. But yeah, the two Asian fighters on the card, really excited. Looking forward to both of these fights. First up, we've got Joshua Van, young Burmese prospect that's got a lot of people talking, and he's going to be fighting Kevin Borjas. Some people thought that this may be a little bit of maybe it's me saying I thought that this was a little bit of a mismatch, feeling like Van is probably worth a step up here since he did just beat Jogos Jumagulov. But since he's young and fighting another young guy, I'm all here for it. Let's give him some more experience. Let's get him some bright lights going to Madison Square Garden in New York. So really, really big opportunity for Josh Van to show out. Yeah, he looked great against Jogos Jumagulov. I think also some of you guys asked last week how I thought this fight would go. I think that Van is going to just be the tighter, more technical guy from top to bottom. And I think he should either get like a late TKO or most likely a decision win. Either way, it should be really exciting. The other fight on the card with an Asian fighter is Kang, Mr. Perfect out of South Korea. He's going to be fighting John Castaneda. And, you know, at first when I thought about this fight, maybe you can call this bias or whatever, but I thought Kang deserved a little bit more of a step up. I thought this could be like an easy win for him. But then when I actually watched the footage, when I compared these two guys, looked at the records and their different skill set, I'm honestly not sure who's going to win this fight. I think Kang is dangerous on the feet. He's obviously really dangerous on the ground, where he's got a lot of submission wins, but so is Castaneda. Like, he's got a BJJ brown belt as well. He's got good takedown defense, good wrestling, and he's a really, really tough guy too. So I really don't know how this fight is going to go. And honestly, it could end up just being who lands first or who gets the better over the distance, the better strikes over the distance. So yeah, I'm not really sure. And that's why I love this fight, is because I think it could be really exciting. And yeah, let's see what happens in that fight. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, you see the card, lots of exciting fights through and through. So that's UFC 295. The news that I wanted to get to, I have a little bit of breaking news here in a second for you. But obviously you all by now have seen that Song Yadong is going to be fighting Chris Gutierrez in the UFC Shanghai main event. This was announced a couple days ago. Magic MMA Bets was the first to report the fight. And then I believe it was Cole Shelton kind of put it out there that the fight was signed and official. So, I mean, at this point, we're all just relieved to finally have a main event. We're relieved that Song Yadong has a ranked opponent to fight at UFC Shanghai. And for a second, I was really wondering, like, should they have just gotten tried to rebook Johnny Walker and Magomed Ankalaev? You know, just another fight between ranked fighters to throw as the main event of this Shanghai card. But I am really glad they stuck with Song Yadong, because, you know, when you're talking about Chinese MMA fighters, you've got Zhang Weili, who has a huge presence, who could, you know, she could serve as the main event in a lot of different places. Yan Xiaonan has fought in the main event before. Song Yadong has, I believe he's fought in 2 UFC main events. He's gone 1-1 because he had that fight with Corey Sandhagen and then the fight earlier this year with Ricky Simone. But I feel like, you know, for being such a young guy, for having so much potential and promise ahead of him, and being, you know, ranked in the top 10 for a long time, I honestly just feel like, one, he's earned it. 2, this only just helps to create another local star in China. He's a young guy. He's growing in popularity. And so I am really glad they decided to stick with Song, even if it's not like a massive marquee #1 contender kind of fight. But glad that they got Chris Gutierrez. He's a very tough fighter, and I don't think it'll be an easy fight for Song at all. But otherwise, as far as the co-main event goes, there was a lot of rumors going around, and I even saw a graphic floating around of like the finalized UFC Shanghai card that included Nasruddin Imavov fighting Roman Dolidze in the co-main event. I never said anything about it because I hadn't heard that it was official just yet. And it's true. What's that fellow's name who reports so reliably on Georgian MMA? I gotta look him up, or else I'm going to butcher his name. Georgi Kokiashvili reports. He says, per his sources, there will be no Roman Dolidze versus Nasruddin Imavov at UFC Shanghai. The Georgian will be back early 2022. So there it is. No Imavov versus Dolidze at UFC Shanghai. That would have been a great co-main event. 2 ranked middleweights. Potential for a lot of violence there. So unfortunate. I'm not sure how close that fight actually got to being a reality at UFC Shanghai, but hopefully, I mean, I doubt that they would throw like Ankalaev versus Walker as a co-main event. That's like an easy fight. You could set that as a fight night main event anywhere, and so they may want to try and save that. I don't know, maybe even for that January 13th card in Las Vegas. So does not have a main event, but yeah, not sure what they're going to do for a co-main. They could even just let the card sit as it is and set like Park Jun-young versus Andre Muniz as the co-main. Not sure if they would do the Mudarji Alan Nascimento fight as the co-main, but yeah, thinking. I mean, yeah, we keep saying it, we should know any day, but time is running out to set another co-main event. So as of now, for UFC Shanghai, we've got, I think, 11 of the 13 fights announced. That's right. So we still don't know who Kevin Jousset is fighting. Most likely, like 95% that Song Come On. I've tried to inquire about that. Haven't heard anything back, but most likely he's going to be fighting Song Come On. And that's just purely a guess. Purely a guess there. Road UFC fights are all finalized. So overall, I think it will be a really good event, especially for China, for Chinese fans. But yeah, it'd be great if we could get one really solid co-main event announced in the next few days. Other than that, as far as Asian MMA news goes, the only small bit of breaking news is that the Brave event that is coming up on November 25th from Jakarta, Indonesia. We should know everything about that card pretty soon, as it's just over 2 weeks away. So I would think any day we should hear the full card for that. I did hear back from Windry Patalima because I did break the news, or I didn't break it. I take that back. I did not break the fight, but I kind of put it out there because I saw it on his Instagram story that he had an opponent that was Eslam Abdel Minam, an Egyptian guy. Well, Patalima has informed me that he has a different opponent now for that Brave event, and that is Mohammed Abdel Fattah, who I believe is also Egyptian. Let me just take a look at this guy. I believe he is a 5-3 Egyptian guy. So from what I can see just from stats, it seems like a pretty good opponent for Patalima, especially getting that in Indonesia. Nothing really that stands out from Fattah's record on here. Fought in Egypt mostly, so entirely in Egypt. But yeah, look forward to that fight and look forward to the whole Brave card being released soon, where we can find out what other Indonesian fighters are going to be in there. I've heard Yudi Kayudi, the Brave interim bantamweight champion, is going to be on there, and also Gugun Guzman should also be on the card as well. So that's great. Let's just get more and more Indonesian guys to get these kind of international style fights. All right, that concludes the schedule and news. Let's see what you got for me. Am I excited for Josh Van? Do you think he wins? Yeah, I covered that, but I do think Josh Van wins. Okay, so yeah, all right, Jimmy. So thank you, Jimmy. Jimmy sent me an email earlier with a question, which I appreciate him doing that because then I could actually do a little bit of research. So basically, I'm putting up your question on the screen, asking about champion activity. Comment from In Cage Fighting, basically saying that Weili is holding up the division and only fighting every 10 months. So I wondered, what is normal to defend a belt? How often do champions defend their belts? There's a lot of different metrics that you could use to look at that. But basically what I did was I looked at every single belt for the last 5 years and kind of tried to see how often do all of these belts get defended in the course of 1 year. So, okay, so yeah, let's run down the line here. So basically, light heavyweight gets every year it is defended or fought for 2.2 times. So in the last 5 years, it's been fought for 11 times. This is not including interim titles, but that's light heavyweight is the most active belt, believe it or not. And then 10 times in the last 5 years is welterweight, men's flyweight, and women's flyweight. You can thank Valentina Shevchenko for that stat. You can thank like Brandon Moreno, Davison Figueiredo for fighting so many times, keeping that belt active. Also, Kamaru Usman staying pretty active as well. So 10 times. So that's the second. And then the third tier is 9 times over the last 5 years since 2018. This is middleweight, lightweight, women's bantamweight, men's bantamweight, not women's bantamweight, and strawweight, which is Weili's weight class. So strawweight is right in the middle of the pack, 9 times over the last 5 years. And Weili, like basically, as I looked at the stats, like Weili defends her belt and fights as often as any of the other top strawweights. She doesn't fight more or less. She's right in line with the middle of the pack. There were times where she fought in close proximity, and then other times where she took a little bit more time off. But to her favor, she has not really gotten injured, which is a big thing. I mean, you think about a lot of champions have been injured and out for a while. So yeah, she has stayed pretty healthy for the most part. After strawweight, after those 4, featherweight has been fought for 8 times in the last 5 years, heavyweight 7 times, and women's bantamweight 6 times. Probably due to a lot of the like Amanda Nunes going back and forth between featherweight and bantamweight. Didn't even include featherweight because it's hardly even a division. So, but yeah, so basically you're asking about wanting to see Weili fight as soon as possible. Well, the thing is that she fights the same amount of time as everyone else. She takes the same amount of time off. She fights as frequently as everyone. So there are times when other fighters will take, like, there were multiple times looking at the champion schedule where a champion would take off 14 months because they were injured. And for the most part, like, Weili has not taken that type of time off. So she fights at least once a year, sometimes twice a year. So that's absolutely normal for that level. You look at like Rose Namajunas, there was a time when she fought twice in 5 months, and then the most recent time she had taken 16 months off. And so fighters of the elite caliber, they're much more often in these 5-round fights or scheduled for 5-round fights. They're more prone to injury. They are probably making more money, so they don't need to fight as often. Fighters of the elite tier just don't often do that. That's why fighters like Volkanovski and Adesanya are kind of exceptions and kind of freaks. And maybe if I could just throw it out there, not always that smart for taking fights that often. So yeah, it's like, do you want to see Weili fight more often and have a shorter career, or do you want to see her have a longer career and fight a little less often? I would rather her fight a little less often and maybe get to see her fight until her upper 30s. So that's how I feel about things. Yeah, as often as everyone else. All right, so how happy was I when Boa lost to Mira? Does it finally put to rest that she's not even on the same league as Weili, and that her bring up last week was just clout chasing? I wouldn't say that I was happy at all. Well, first of all, I can't remember if I said it last week, but I was basically just like, yeah, as long as Mengbo avoids this one singular place that Ayaka Mira is really, really good at, which is the scarf hold position, then she should be fine. And then she proceeds to get submitted exactly from that position. So, yeah, I think it does go to show the gap of like, there's not, especially like in one strawweight division, there's hardly anyone to challenge for Xiong Jingnan. I mean, the thing is like fighters call out people that are way, way better than them all the time. Think about like Sean O'Malley calling out Devin Haney in boxing. It paid off for him, but like Francis Ngannou calling out Tyson Fury. Amazing. That just goes to show you how incredible it was that he took him to a split decision. But fighters are always calling out people that are way, way better than them. Just because it puts that in people's mind. It also like shortens, if that fight ever is to happen, if a fighter's calling out a champion a bunch, it could shorten their path to a title. I mean, honestly, it just works in their favor, at least in terms of getting them to those bigger fights sooner. So I actually understand those kind of call outs, but when it's like cross like promotions in sports, I tend to roll my eyes a little bit more just because the reality of these fights happening is so much less. But honestly, so like I've been working on the script for this video forever, partially because it's got a lot of stats in it, but I've been looking at at One Championships women's divisions, basically kind of just trying to see like, hey, these divisions, are they dying? Like, what's going on here? And, atom weight is a whole different thing, but like straw weight in One Championship. Second here. Sorry, I need to stop fidgeting around. Straw weight in One Championship is pretty much a graveyard. I'm wondering if it's even around in a year. Xiong Jingnan, I feel like any of her fights could be her last. And there is literally no one to challenge her in that division. No, I take that back. Victoria Souza is probably the only person that could fight for that belt. But like Meng Guo I feel like should have fought for that belt. And then she fought and lost to Ayaka. Ayaka has already fought and lost to Xiong Jingnan recently. There are so few women in that division, and it's such an inactive division. And it's only becoming more and more inactive. So I get the feeling that one may be folding that division in the next year. Crazy prediction, but like, I mean, that's the trajectory of things. If you look at like the UFC's featherweight division, like basically the UFC's featherweight division and what happened to it, basically that's happening to strawweight and One Championship now. They've got an aging champion who doesn't really have anyone to fight, who is kind of thrown around retirement here and there. And they're not really like rebuilding the division. And so when the champion leaves, there's not going to be anything really even to fold, except for maybe 3 or 4 fighters. So I was disappointed in the result just for that reason, because now it feels like there's not really like that seemed like the fight to make, the only fight to make in the division, and now that's gone. So I don't know what's going to happen with one strawweight division. I really don't. Asking about Chinese prospect Shi Ming. Saw her training at the PI on Douyin. Will she make it to the UFC one day? Well, I have heard of her. Yeah, she comes from a wrestling background, and she's trained at the PI off and on quite a bit. But Shermeen Ming, she let me just pull up her record real quick. She hasn't been fighting the best of competition, and she hasn't been very active either. So she's got a 14-5 record, which is pretty dang respectable. She's 28 years old, so she's honestly, with just those stats on their own, a pretty like valuable fighter to have on a roster out of China. She holds wins over Ding Yao, Liu Xiaomi. She fought in road a couple times. Most of her wins, beyond those two that I listed, are pretty much all over fighters that are like 3 fights or less. A lot of them no fights. Like she fought this, the last time she fought was last October at the Kunming International Kung Fu Cultural Festival 5. Jeez. The KIKCF 5. And she won by submission, but she fought a fighter with no fights. Before that, same thing, fought for WLF. So let's get her back in WLF. Let's get her fighting some of these other prospects. Let's get her in JCK. JCK is bringing in more and more fighters from the female divisions, especially in strawweight. So let's get her in JCK or WLF if she's actually really serious about this, which she's still like right in her prime. She's on a 2-fight win streak. She's got the PI behind her. I'm not really sure totally what's like holding her back at this point. So she just needs to stay active, but she is a really good wrestler, that's for sure. Am I familiar with the term fraud check? I do in like a literal like banking check. What does that term mean to you? Was Lemos fraud checked against Weili? Was Volkanovski fraud checked by Islam? Did Andrade get fraud checked by Haggerty? Are you asking if those fighters got found out to be frauds? Because I don't think so. I think in a lot of those fights they were just bad matchups. It's all about the matchup. You find matchups. I mean, in MMA, you're continually trying to find matchups that you can win, or matches that are challenges for you that you can still win. But overall, like no, like all those fighters. I mean, you know, Amanda Lemos, she's not a terrible fighter. I wouldn't say she's top 5, but she's not a bad fighter. We know Volkanovski's one of the best in the world right now. Fabricio Andrade, probably one of the best at bantamweight right now, at least in MMA. But it was all the matchups. Islam Makhachev had a full training camp and already had a win this year over Volkanovski, and so he had all the data to figure out how to get the stoppage. Haggerty fighting in his home court. I know Andrade used to fight kickboxing, but Haggerty much more active in kickboxing. He's the champion, won championship. So, and then against Lemos, I mean, just fought a much more complete, well-rounded Zhang Weili, who had a much better strategy and better preparation. And it was just a bad matchup for Lemos. So I feel like fraud check, what I would think that the best use of that word is if you have someone. So, okay, here's fraud check. There was that Ukrainian guy, Askar Mojarev, who was kind of infamous for forging a lot of his record, meaning that he had fought under different names or fought or worked to get losses off of his record, falsifying results. And then he gets signed to the UFC, and then he gets defeated really easily and immediately released. That was fraud checked. He fought somewhere where he could no longer get by fighting hands, and he got fraud checked. So that's what I think of as fraud check. Otherwise, I think those fights were either just differences in skill or bad matchups. Or with Volkanovski, again, like didn't really have much of a training camp, and fighting in Abu Dhabi, where it's much easier probably for Makhachev to fight. A lot of different factors. In addition, lightweight being Makhachev's natural weight class, having that win already over Volkanovski. So that is, I think, how I would interpret that. Asking how important it is to be the first to report in MMA. So I would say it is very important. However, you can still make a living, not a living. You can still get by not reporting fights. You can still get by just like quickly reposting. But you all know, like, speed is everything in MMA media, and even like down to the minute, those are really important. So the people that just like, and I do this all the time too. Sometimes it's just a matter of my own availability, not wanting to, you know, be on my phone literally 24/7, having to sleep, needing a social life, needing to eat, all these other things to where I can't just literally be connected to my phone all the time. Sometimes I'll post news much after the fact. If I had other people on my team to help me, maybe I could change that. But yeah, being the first to report the news. I mean, I will, as someone who's reported, I literally on this podcast reported news to you for the first time. So if you break news pretty much right away, like if you look back at all of my my highest performing bits of social media posts, almost all of them are breaking news. And so there's that. It gets you a ton of traffic. It gets you a ton of new followers, subscribers, people that are aware of your website, whatever. So breaking news does that, because like if I break a fight right now and then MMA Junkie writes about it, most likely, and they always do this, they're going to cite me and they're going to link to my like Twitter page. So that is really big, and it is just going to raise my awareness. It's also kind of like a little bit of a resume. Like if you are continually, because like the way I see it is like if once a month or so, a couple times a month, I'm putting out breaking fights with Asian MMA fighters, then that could open up potentially other job opportunities in the future with bigger companies that may be able to offer bigger salaries. So like if you think about it, it is kind of like a resume. You're sort of proving to the rest of like the MMA community and the MMA media community that you have a lot of value. So there's that side of it as well, because breaking news and doing it accurately and reliably is really hard to do. Everyone wants to do it, but only a few people can do it accurately and reliably. A lot of people will get those like one-off things where they're best friends with this one fighter, and then so they're able to break the fights for that one fighter. But having like a broad network shows your commitment to MMA media, because you can only get a broad network if you've been in the game for a long time. Really, it's really true, especially for people that are harder and harder to access. You're not going to get into MMA media tomorrow. You're not going to start an MMA Instagram account tomorrow and automatically get access to all of the Dominance MMA clients. You're not going to get that. You're going to have to be around for a long time. You're going to have to get to know people, maybe even some face-to-face encounters. So it shows your commitment. So I would say that's why it is so important to break news. Although not everyone does it. You think about so many MMA media personalities, and a lot of them don't break news. You really what's most important is that you have content that gets people's attention. That's really what it is. Breaking news can do that. Obviously, that's one of the best ways to get people's attention, not the best. But providing entertaining content that's well produced, thought through, that gets people's attention as well. So not everyone does it. Luke Thomas doesn't break fights, but he consistently puts out really thoughtful, high quality content and has amassed a really big following because of that. But yeah, so the other thing is that even if you're not the first to break news, even being someone who reliably reposts the news and credits the original reporters, that is also important. Now, the line between that, and this is where a lot of people get caught up, is knowing, is having discretion when quickly reposting fights, knowing which outlets and which people are reliable and trustworthy. Honestly, like I've reported fights that have not been immediately picked up by a lot of the big outlets, and I know people like Nolan King and Marcel Dorff. They follow me, they see what I'm posting out there, but they don't immediately. I'm never offended by that um, because I know like Marcel, his reputation is really important to him. Nolan, his reputation is really important to him. I haven't been in this game all that long, and so for them, sometimes they're like taking more time to like actually check the fight themselves and kind of wait until maybe things are announced. I don't know. They're maybe waiting for a little bit more. They don't know, I guess, what I know, so they're waiting a little bit, and I don't blame them for that. So I think as you mature as an MMA media member, you are more and more comfortable not immediately posting everything that you see, because there's a couple like MMA Twitter and Instagram accounts out there that do that, and I think they're not really, they may have a big following, but they're not really taken seriously. So yeah, that's my take on that. So, no, he's not here. What do you think of guys like Ghost or Jack Slack who do not care about the results of fights? Is that apathetic nature and laughing about fights not healthy for the MMA community as a whole? It's not healthy about, I mean, for them, the whole thing is breaking fights down, right? So breaking things down is all that matters. I doubt that I would say that they don't care about the results, because the way how good they can break down fights can often, what am I trying to say? Like the result of a fight could validate how good their breakdowns are. Right. So like if they break down all the ins and outs of Alex Pereira's game going against Yuri Prochazka this weekend, and then when that fight happens, you see all these tools that Pereira has, then that if he wins the fight, that validates, in a sense, their breakdown. But for them, it's all about, all they care about is really looking at things after the fact. So that's their side of MMA media, and they're good at it, and that's what they've given. They're not really talking about results. They're not really talking about like divisional impact or like, yeah, and really anything else aside from breaking things down, examining past footage. So that's just what they've decided to invest themselves in. Thanks for that extensive research. This outstanding double standard that exists with Weili and the rest of the weight class. Mentioned Weili's activity a few podcasts ago, and this just validates it. Chris is a godsend. Hey, thanks, James. Yeah, I mean, there are often hidden motives behind observations that people use to point things out like that. I'll just say that. So what's your opinion on MMA meme accounts that make fun of Asian fighters? It seems to be a trend these days, which is really bad. You know, I'm not on the internet enough, or I guess I don't follow the right accounts to really see those. I didn't even know that was a thing. Honestly, I don't really follow any MMA meme accounts. I followed a couple on Twitter in the past, but have kind of narrowed things down on my social media following. But yeah, it's unfortunate to hear. I mean, I know a lot of people kind of ridiculed some of the Chinese fighter names for a while, and probably still do, which I can only imagine what our like English names sound like to them and what words some of them sound like. So yeah, it's just it's a language thing. Language is what it is. People's names are what they are. Not really wise to make fun of that stuff. Do I know why one championship women's division even has a ranking? What's the point of why they have 12 fighters total? Better to just close down one strawweight. Yeah, that's what I was kind of saying is, well, strawweight division doesn't have rankings. They've dropped those rankings. I think they used to have rankings, but they don't have rankings anymore, which is interesting. Atomweight makes a little more sense, but at the same time, like, I don't know. Atomweight is honestly a much healthier division in one championship, but I still would not call it a healthy division. If you look, Stamp Fairtex just became the champion of that division, and she's already beaten 3 of the top 5 in the division somewhat recently. And I don't really see a whole lot of challenges for her, even in the whole of atomweight. My concern with, and honestly, I don't know if it's just a women's division thing, but like, these are like one of the things I think about most in MMA world is like, what is one championship strategy? Because like, to my eyes, it looks, and I've talked about this before, I won't belabor the point, but it looks like the MMA divisions are dying off. And they have great fights that they can make now. They have a lot of really good fighters, but just looking forward and over the past year, like my biggest concern is that they have not been signing people that can be future champions. They have not been signing the right fighters. They have not been signing like well-known fighters from other promotions. They signed Roberto Soldic last year, and like they signed Ben Tynon earlier this year, and he just fought last week. That's great, but like you need more. And like even like Ben Tynon isn't like a huge name, like he's not a big prospect, but I'm looking over the last year and looking at these Friday fight shows where they're signing a lot of fighters that are pretty inexperienced and putting them against each other on a lot of these one fight contracts, assuming that out of these fighters, there's going to be a couple future contenders. But a year later, I mean, we're 11 months into this one Lupini process. A year later, there's not a whole lot of fighters that I would like really, that there's really hardly anyone that's come out of that. And probably like the fighter that I would say had the best chance at fighting for a belt, one championship is basically blackballed, like or blacklisted, and that's Kim So-Yul. So I don't know what's going on. I'm wondering if it's going to be this like contracting and then expanding, where it's like maybe MMA divisions are going to kind of shrink for a little while and then they'll grow back up. I feel like in a lot of ways, what we're seeing is one championship like really trying to make a hard swerve to change their business practices to become profitable. So in that sense, they may actually be doing the right thing, right? Moving to have almost all of their events in Thailand, featuring more Muay Thai fights than anything else, allows them to be able to pay less travel costs than ever before, considering most of their athletes now are Thai. They're able to kind of just keep things permanently in Bangkok. So their costs have never been lower, and they're signing a lot of like young, inexperienced fighters to these one fight contracts. The contracts are really small. A lot of the older, more veteran fighters with expensive contracts are kind of aging out or leaving the promotion. So if one is trying to cut costs, I have no financial like data to prove this, but from what I can see, it seems like they are really doing it. Whatever needs to happen for them to become more profitable, for them to cut costs, they are doing it. And for them just like traveling all around Asia, having fighters with these really big expensive contracts just was not the way to do it. And so maybe eventually we'll see them return to that. Especially like I think the biggest thing for one championship right now may be how much of an impact can they make in the US, and that is directly connected to how many states can they get to approve their rule set. So they have Colorado. We just heard from Eric McGrocken about Georgia. So they can go to Denver, they can go to Atlanta, probably to smaller arenas, 6,000 to 10,000 seat arenas in those states. So, but you can only do those two places so many times. So let's see, if they can get any more states to sign on. It sounds like the ABC, the American Boxing Commission, has had some pretty strong pushback to the idea. So I don't know if that's actually going to create space for some states to reason for them not to want to approve that rule set. But that, I think, is one of the biggest determining factors of one championship's success. How big and how popular can they get just hosting shows in Bangkok week after week after week after week, probably putting on like great fights all the time with fighters from Thailand. They could do that they could literally just like become a Muay Thai promotion and probably do just fine. But yeah, I have a lot more thoughts that I'll put out once I eventually finish this video on the women's divisions. But that is a really big storyline, I think, to watch next year is one championship in the US, both the shows that they hold. I know they've said they wanted to do 4 shows, probably one in Colorado and one in Atlanta, Georgia, are like the 2 that are right there. But yeah, you need more states. You can't just go to the same state like over and over and over unless you make tickets free, which is kind of what they did in their first Denver show. But yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so since I am a journalist, would I follow in the footsteps of James Lynch by making a Patreon? People have asked that. People have asked that a couple times for me, and I think for me to do a Patreon, there'd have to be 2 things. First of all, I'd have to be able to create content that I really believe, and not just that I believe, but I maybe have some data that people would want to pay for, because that kind of content would end up taking up a lot of my time. So I would need to make sure that people are going to want to pay for it on a Patreon. Second, I need to have a bigger following. Right now, my following on Instagram is 16K, and Instagram has been really, really weird the last year or 2. My following on YouTube should hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Twitter, it's about 1,000. So right now, I don't really feel like I have the following to make that worth it. There is another thing that I am spending a lot of time like looking into. I won't say it in case I end up changing my mind, but there is something I'm hoping, kind of trying to look at some data about maybe launching early next year. That would not be a paid thing, it would be a free thing, but another way to generate some more, basically make more money off of this. And I think a missing piece that the MMA ecosystem brand has been missing for a long time that would really help to like bring some stability and reliability to things. So I think before I do a Patreon, I would need to do a couple more things. But those are the 2 things. I need to have content that will make money. I need to have ideas for that kind of content. And I also need to have a bigger following. But maybe one day. All right, Mike's MMA picks. Yeah, I've been on a show with him before. Defines fraud check as someone who is hyped to high heaven, but when they lose, they're considered as not good in the first place. So, problem is I probably forgot about a lot of these fighters that were hyped so high. I think about some of these fighters that were really, really had a lot of hype behind them, and then they fought like anybody in the top 15, 20, and then they just kept taking L's. Like think about Thomas Almeida, that Brazilian bantamweight who is really good, or at least really, really good, exciting Muay Thai striker. But then, is he even still fighting anymore? Or did he retire? Because I'm pretty sure he fought Cody Garbrandt in like a UFC main event, if I'm not mistaken. That was really cool. So Thomas Almeida fought, and then he fought Cody Garbrandt. So he was a really, really young Brazilian guy fought four times in the UFC and looked outstanding. Beat Anthony Burchak, Brad Pickett, Yves Jabouin, Tim Gorman. And then they threw him in a main event against Cody Garbrandt on a fight night, and Cody Garbrandt got him out of there in the first round. He won his follow-up fight, but then he lost. Jeez, look at who they put this kid up against. Jimmy Rivera, Rob Font, Jonathan Martinez, and Sean O'Malley. They put him against like 4 really, really good bantamweights. Maybe that wasn't the best idea. Ugh. And he left the UFC in 2021. Earlier this year, he competed in a grappling contest, but has not fought in MMA since. So yeah, really interesting, just, career trajectory where he just kind of fell off the map. But yeah, I think that does happen from time to time in the UFC when someone performs really well in the regional circuit, doesn't maybe have the best competition, and then kind of falls flat on their face once they fight someone that's really, really elite. But yeah, it's an interesting term. Do I think the UFC will ever go to Thailand? How hard is it to get a contract from the UFC to schedule fights? A contract from the UFC to schedule fights in MMA? I'm not really sure if I understand that second part, but do I ever think the UFC will go to Thailand? Yeah, they would go to the Impact Arena in Bangkok if they went. And I need to look into that arena. Just because you have like a decent arena in a certain place doesn't necessarily mean that it's like capable of hosting a UFC event. I'm not really even sure exactly what it needs, but usually arenas that are renovated, kind of basketball style, fit the bill. The Impact Arena in Bangkok, which has hosted a lot of One Championship events, would be really the only candidate for that. For them to go to Thailand, I think, MMA hasn't really even been a thing in Thailand until the last couple of years. And so I think they would maybe want to wait a little bit longer for that. But I think in the next 5 years, I would say in the next 5 years, we'll probably see that happen. Right now, they don't really have they've got Loma Lukbunmi, and those are their only fighters from Thailand. They had opportunities with that earlier this year and Road to UFC with both Top Noi and Peter Daniso. Both of those fighters unfortunately lost. So still no male fighter from Thailand to enter the UFC. I think if they had a couple fighters to build that off of, the case would be a lot stronger. But is there the demand from Thai fans to watch MMA fights in an MMA, like a large MMA setting? That I literally don't know. Now, the thing about Thailand that would be super appealing for the UFC is that they could host that event probably fairly cheaply, and they could most likely save a lot of money on travel costs, right? Because so many fighters train out of Thailand. More elite level fighters train out of Thailand than any other country in Asia, and it's not even close. So that's what could be really appealing to the UFC about going to Thailand, is having such amazing athletes that are just a short train ride away. But yeah, in the next couple of years, someone just sent me an article about big MMA events coming to Indonesia. And yeah, it's looking like September, October next year in Jakarta. And PFL, I heard in that article, is also interested in going to Indonesia, which is interesting. Honestly, that makes a lot of sense, though, because they could, since they're I don't know, maybe PFL is still too high of a level for a lot of Indonesian fighters. But if they're going to do an Asia series in PFL, then definitely they could. I would want to have those in Jakarta. I would want to have those in Thailand and Singapore, and maybe Korea as well. So yeah, could be really interesting. But I do think probably Indonesia is next up. A lot of China shows, maybe going back to Singapore, probably going back to Korea. at some point in the next 3 years. But it depends on how much the Thai MMA market, like the fan demand, grows. That is something to watch for. I do wonder if one thing that is interesting to see, sometimes the UFC, if they make like a social media account targeted towards a certain market, could be interesting. This is hilarious. Maybe I just answered my own question here. There is a UFC Thailand Instagram account, and it is verified, and it does post content that looks legit. It's called UFC Thailand, but you know how many followers it has? 228. So maybe that's the answer to our question, that UFC is still a little ways away from becoming super popular in Thailand. Do I know the story of Ian Gary and Leon Edwards where Gary was asked to leave? I don't. I'm not always super like plugged into like gym drama, but I am interested in this. What's my take on that? That a ranked welterweight asked to leave by the gym of a champion. So Gary trains at Killcliff, and Leon Edwards trains at Team Renegade. I'm guessing that was maybe a while ago, seeing as though Gary's been at Killcliff FC for a little while. But I hadn't heard that. Maybe I'll need to look into that. To move back to Asian MMA, Loma and Whaley share coaches where they're in camp and help each other get better, but they don't complain that about each other that we know of. Talking about like fighters in the same weight class training together. Yeah, they do it all the time. I mean, I think once they start to get close, I mean, even like the bantamweights like Marab and Aljamain, where you have potentially at one point it was like the top guy and then the #1 contender training together. That created a little bit of an issue, but I think fighters do it all the time. There's a lot of welterweights that train out of Killcliff FC also. So yeah, I think it does happen all the time. If Loma were to ever like make a title run, it wouldn't surprise me if Whaley just, you know, moved somewhere else and trained somewhere else, because she's a little bit more of a wandering fighter. You know, did that particular training camp back in at a Black Tiger or something like that. But yeah, for sure. So I'll give you an example of back to your question. Oh, meme accounts. I won't name names, but they were making fun of this American MMA fighter's record in China, and the meme account just said, "It's China, and there are no good fighters there," just dismissing a whole group of people in a sport that we want to grow. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit around and say that like China has this like the most talent rich internal ecosystem of all the world. Like yeah, there's a lot of like it, you all know as much as I do, it's still a growing sport in China, but at the same time, like, I mean, you could say that about so many places, honestly. You could say, I mean, if you're talking about like kickboxing, then like if you have a bunch of wins over Chinese fighters, then you're suddenly like, that's really, really good. Like Adesanya fighting for Kunlun is a really good look. So yeah, a lot of Chinese fighters when it comes to like kickboxing are top of the game. And then of course you have got that Chinese boxer, Zhang Zhilei. So yeah, there's always dumb stuff like that out there. Why did Chaudhry switch from Honor to this trash talk about other promotions? Well, yeah, not just other promotions, but sometimes trash talking his own fighters too. Of just like, well, he's never fought anyone from one championship, so he's not that good. Or like, well, he only fought in Japan, so like he really hasn't been tested, you know. So about fighters that fight on his roster, very interesting. I'm not sure if that was ever like a switch that he made. I talked about it last week, but like under the surface, like all these promoters and like these organizations, like, I don't know about Bellator is like the last promotion that I'm like, I just have to believe that Bellator is just run by a bunch of saints. However you feel about the product, it just seems like everyone that works there is like really, really nice professional people. But and you never hear a bad thing about Scott Coker. But I mean, yeah, all these other promotions, especially the bigger ones, like it's very cutthroat. Honor means very, very little. They're there to make money and they're there for their investors. So things like Honor are just used as marketing tools. They're used as branding to try and align with like the spirit of martial arts. But it's mostly fake. It's mostly fake. Tagged you in the Ermekov tweet about Denver when Rain asked about it last week. Did you find it interesting that the UFC boycotted Denver in response to the rule change? I did, and I wasn't really, I was confused about like if that was how real that was, that they had boycotted Denver, or like, not that I'm obviously not calling Eric McGrawkin like someone that would make things up like that, but I just, yeah, it's like, is that actually true? Because I don't know. It's like I don't really know of the UFC to kind of play that kind of competition with other promotions, because I don't really think that they see one championship as much of like competition. And so that's why I was kind of surprised about that. It seemed, I don't know, like whenever people ask Dana about like, sorry, I keep dropping my mic. I have ADHD, I fidget around. Whenever people ask Dana about other promotions, he's just kind of like, oh, yeah, good for them. It seems like he doesn't really care or see them as much of competition. But then like, then you hear things like that where it's like, wow, they're willing to not go to Denver just to like kind of put that threat out there for other states legalizing the, legalizing things, the one rule set. But I mean, if you really want to make states choose between UFC and one championship, I mean, yeah, that is one way to absolutely like kill any kind of momentum or like any ability of one championship to legalize things. It's just like, say like, okay, fine. Well, if you legalize these rule sets, then we're not going to come to your state. So yeah, absolutely, states would rather have UFC than one championship. But yeah, that's interesting. Let's keep watching that. And it's like for the UFC, it's like losing Denver, is that really much of a hit for them? And if things went through with Atlanta, like Atlanta, I feel like that's a pretty good place for them to go as well. But they can go to Florida like they have a gajillion times the last few years. They can go to, instead of Denver, they can go to I don't know, Texas, Salt Lake City. They can go to Salt Lake City. They have a million places that want them to come. So like losing Denver is not that much of a sacrifice, even if it's just for a couple years. So, okay. So rephrasing, how hard is it to get a contract from the UFC to schedule fights in MMA in Thailand? I'm not sure if you're talking like from an event level, like if you're trying to campaign to have the UFC come to your arena, your country. But I think probably pretty hard, unless like so much of it depends on the incentives, right? Like different tourism boards will incentivize the UFC to host an event in their state or their country with different incentives. Also, like being able to, like, if the UFC is almost sure to come to your area if they know that they can not only have the arena to do it, but if they can sell out that arena with and be able to charge a pretty good price for those tickets. Of course, they can sell out an arena by charging $20 a ticket, but they don't want to do that. They're not going to give away a bunch of comp tickets, a bunch of free tickets, one championship in Denver. But I think that's probably the biggest barrier right now is like if the UFC were to host an event at the Impact Arena, everything works out. They've got a great card. The arena works out. Probably like I don't know that they're going to be able to. I don't know. Maybe they can, simply on the fact that they've never been there before. But I don't know if they're going to be able to, sell it out at the ticket prices that they want to sell. I need to look back and see like what the attendance was like for some of those Impact Arena shows for one championship, because that could be that's probably the best barometer to see what the demand is in Thailand for MMA on like a bigger level. You have like, honestly, there's not a whole lot of MMA fights going on in Thailand right now. Like Legend FC was doing some, which is like where Ivan Parshikov kind of came up through. Peter Daniso fought for Legend FC, but like I don't feel like there's been a whole lot going on with MMA in Thailand recently, aside from the one shows. And maybe that's because like those Friday fight shows just kind of sucked up the market for them. That might be what happened. Okay, get to end it with my obligatory JMMA question. Would you have liked to see Kyoji Horiguchi versus Henry Cejudo? Ooh, that would have been really good. Kyoji is good at karate that adapted wrestling, and Henry is a wrestler that incorporated karate into style. Yes. I love that. I love that fight. And maybe, hey, who knows? Both of those guys are still technically active, and they're both still fighting in the same division. Maybe we could still get it. If Horiguchi ever comes over to the UFC again, I doubt Cejudo is going to go over to like Ryzen. But Horiguchi, who knows what's going on with Bellator, but if Bellator is going away, if he's released from his contract, it could give him that opportunity. But I feel like he's probably making pretty good money fighting for Ryzen. So it wouldn't surprise me if he wants to stay there. But who knows? Maybe we could get Horiguchi back in the UFC. I would love to see that fight. That would be a really, really good fight, honestly. Probably lean towards Cejudo a little bit, but man, would definitely be exciting and probably pretty unpredictable in a lot of ways. All right, so that is today's show. Really appreciate you guys again. Love going into the weeds on a couple different things, and yeah, I'm always feeling like, oh man, I'd love to talk about this for another 30 minutes, but yeah. And sorry I haven't been putting out a lot of other videos recently. I've had some just like weird scheduling thing. I've like had a UFC Shanghai video like ready to film for a long time, but they've been so slow to like release that full card. I've been working on this one championship video, and today I was working on scripting a Jekka versus Lucas Alexander video for his fight next week. So if I can get to filming that potentially tomorrow, then I can have that maybe by the end of the weekend or potentially even on Monday. So look for that. Hopefully I'll have some more stuff out for you either way. But enjoy UFC 295. Check out those prospects I highlighted. Enjoy your weekend and the fights.